Welcome back to Fresh Rubber. Here we are, reflecting on yet another topsy-turvy but somewhat predictable Japanese Grand Prix qualifying session. Gav, can you feel it? The tension between Kimmy Antonelli and George Russell. Do you think it's sort of simmering, or is it about to bubble up through the surface? What's going on in the Mercedes garage today in the prep?
I don't think it's bubbling yet. I think we've got a lot more simmering tension to bubble as the year goes on. If you remember, George was walking around the paddock from the first race with all the pundits and the bookies saying he was almost guaranteed to win this season, and I think he really believed that. But I think the first little ghostly doubts will begin to creep into his mind at this stage. I don't know about you, Jace, but Kimmy is looking on form. That kid is... he was born to fly in a racing car, wasn't he? The only caveats to that is that in the previous race in China, George did have a tricky issue in qualifying where the car basically just stopped. So he could maybe excuse that one away. And yesterday in qualifying, his back end was not being the back end that George wanted his back end to be. And he was not best pleased at the way the car was performing. So maybe in George's mind, Jace, he's thinking, once the car comes back towards me, I'll begin to dominate again. But there must be a little bit of doubt, whether it's a doubt in the car itself or a doubt in himself, that Kimmy is going to be a formidable contestant this year, right?
Absolutely. And I love that
component
contestant.
competitor.
I think the one
competitor.
One of my favorite phrases from the F1 broadcasting and the media world is when the back end steps out. I just think it's just full of charm, that phrase. I love it.
I'm just stepping out. I'm just stepping out to get some milk. I'm just stepping out to get a loaf of bread. I'm just stepping out so that you can't qualify properly.
Yeah, that's it. And there was a funny exchange with Ted Kravitz and Toto Wolff after the qualifying session. And Toto, who is German-born or Austrian-born and not an English native speaker, he talked about making some twerks to the car and how that had changed things. And I just think...
Who said that? Toto?
Toto Wolff said
Toto
that.
was twerking.
Yeah. And then Ted Kravitz had the gall to call him out on it. He said, Toto, I think you might have meant tweak, not twerk. A twerk is a totally different thing. And there's Toto going, oh God, what did I say? And he ended up just saying, we made a wrong change and we'll leave it at that. And then off he went.
Yeah.
I felt for him. So, but I think you make a good point about George's woes in qualifying in China. And I think the same could be said for Japan as well. There was some things that were out of his control that affected his performance, but full credit where credit's due. In both cases, George still performed. So in China, he basically was sort of tootling around the track with a broken car during Q3, but he still came out and in a single lap managed to put it on P2 in qualifying. And a similar thing happened in Japan where he was able to pull back something like 6/10. 6/10 he found of improvement between Q2 and Q3. He was still 2 or 3 tenths behind Kimmy in terms of P2, but George, it seems, he's able to overcome adversity in ways that I'm finding quite impressive. So kudos to George for not just sort of packing it in and saying,
fair.
The car's not performing, I'm upset. He's still going at it. But Kimmy just seems so calm. He just seems so chill. He's just kind of doing the things, or he was expecting more of himself. He was highly self-critical after he had a lock-up during his second lap in the Q3 session. So even though he put it on pole, he still thinks that's not good enough. I could have done better. There was lap time on the table. So that's exciting.
Something really interesting happened in that final run, the final run of qualifying of Q3, the final session of qualifying. And that is that the wind backed off and the track temperature dropped. I don't know if you noticed, Jace, I'm sure you did, but the performances, you have a qualifying session and the track is ramping up, everyone's getting quicker and quicker. Well, this was a classic example of qualifying where the track went away from the drivers in the very final run. So actually, it kind of speaks to what Kimmy did in that was he banked an absolute belter in his first run. Then the wind dropped off, and the track got cooler. The traction, the grip wasn't there. The cars didn't know how to respond. The drivers, they could feel the change. And so basically no one did a better lap. Maybe one or two did, but very few did a better lap on that final run. And it just goes to show that you, in a Q3, you really want to be banking a decent lap straight off the bat. And that's exactly what Kimmy did. But yeah, mate, what a track. Can we just talk this? I think I fully appreciated this qualifying, how much the drivers love this track. I mean, it's insane. It's narrow, it's fast. You've got so many incredible. You've got the S curves. You've got Spoon, which was taking everyone out with the tailwind. It is a truly technical, truly. I think it's my favorite track now. I'm just going to say I think it's my favorite track for the moment. It is unbelievable. It was designed by Mr. Honda himself, I think, with a Dutch track designer. It's one of the drivers' favorite tracks. And a fun fact for you, in the last kind of 30 odd years, unless you start in the first two positions on the grid, one on P1 or P2, only 3 people have won from anywhere behind first and second off the grid in the last 30 years. So actually, sitting there with Kimmy and George at the front, the likelihood is one of those will win. But how good, Jason, maybe you can speak to this, how good to see Piastri back.
Oh my
He's
word.
back.
I wonder, was he ever really not back?
No,
I think
of course not.
He's had some car and some team difficulties in the first 2 rounds. The only competitive racing he's done was in the China sprint race. So he must be thinking, gosh, I hope I make it to the grid this afternoon. Like,
This is his first GP of the year.
Yeah.
If the car works today.
If the car fails, this is a fun little hypothetical. If for some reason the car fails, because we're not having the next 2 rounds, the first competitive race that he'll have a chance to finish, if he doesn't finish today, will be in May.
Wow.
So that's crazy. Yeah, he looked quite, I guess, relieved, you'd say, to see himself in the sort of qualifying podium. And McLaren, they had a pretty bumpy ride Friday and Saturday with lots of issues, especially on Lando Norris's side. And I think some credit due there as well. Lando Norris basically didn't participate in FP2. Totally. I didn't watch FP3, so I'm not sure what he did there. But he pretty much had a third, at least, less track time than Oscar Piastri, his teammate. And he still managed to pull out the kind of performance that we saw. He's a few tenths back from Piastri, but he's in the mix. This 30 years of stats notwithstanding, he's still in the mix. And I liken that as an example of his mental resilience, something that we might have criticized him before about performing under pressure. I look at that and think that there's more evidence that we've got a more grown-up Norris on the grid this year with his nice number 1 at the front of the car. And let's just hope, do you think McLaren can kind of iron out the kinks before 4 p.m. this afternoon and have a proper race?
I mean, who am I to say, Jace? But I'm very hopeful, and I think what I'm beginning to see, and it's probably too early to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, and we can criticize me all year if I'm wrong. But what I feel like I'm seeing is, a race between Antonelli and Russell, most likely for the championship. The car at this stage is just so dominant. But what I really want to see, if that's going to be the case, it's a bit boring for me. What I really want to see, if that is the case, is McLaren and Ferrari really fighting all year for second or third in the constructors and the driving positioning within that. And I feel like we just got a taste of McLaren saying, hey, remember that we're the team that come back very, very strong with upgrades and develop really well through the year. So I'm hopeful. And like you say, like Lando didn't get P2. I did watch P3. He only got he got the last 20 minutes, I think, of P3. So yeah, kudos to him. Kudos to Charles. Like, we're talking about a guy, just going to look at my stat here. I thought this was a fantastic stat. Out of the last 66, he hasn't dropped out of Q3. He hasn't dropped out. Sorry, he hasn't dropped out in Q1 for 66 races consecutively.
Wow.
That's impressive. I've always called him the qualifying king. I think he is the qualifying king. He had a little mishap in that final run, but he was purple sectoring his little heart away. So I actually think had he got a clean run in, he would have popped up behind George, or maybe even pipped George. So, and given how fast Ferrari with that mini turbo are off the line, I would be expecting to see, Charles jump ahead of Piastri initially, and then we'll see what race pace the Ferraris and the McLarens actually have.
Yeah, I think if Piastri can get off the line is the big unknown, because many of the drivers this year have had difficulty with their starts, and Piastri's literally only had one, whereas the others have had 3. So there's a kind of rustiness that might be there, and these cars are difficult to drive as well. This is an incredibly difficult, challenging circuit. So for Norris to come out and do what he did, I think again super impressive. Also goes to show that wind and the temperature change that you mentioned at the top, Gav, about the last part of Q3, that caught out Charles as well, coming out of the back of the spoon curve.
Mm-hmm.
So none of it was guaranteed, and yet we still did get a P1, P2 for Mercedes. So that's a little bit foreboding. Can I tell you about something I had a chat with my son about this morning? Because he's not a big Kimmy Antonelli fan, and he always gives me a little ribbing whenever I cheer on Kimmy Antonelli. He's a Max fan. He doesn't even watch F1, and he's a Max fan. And I said to him, "Oh, guess who qualified on pole?" And he said, "Max." I said, "No, Kimmy." And I said, "Guess who won the last race in China?" And he said, "Max." And I said, "No, Kimmy." And he said, "Kimmy wins too much. It's not fair. I don't like it." And I reminded him that there was a season 3 seasons ago, 2023, where Max won all but 2 of the races in the entire season. So my little Max fan needs to just sort of get back in his box and remember that winning's for everyone. You know, we got to share it around a little bit,
Share
and not
the
just
winning.
not just kind of, hold it in one hand. But don't you also think, Gav, it's interesting how, thinking back to 2023, we all said it's boring, Max is winning everything. You're kind of implying that I think that Mercedes is going to win this year sort of handily throughout the season. Don't you think it's interesting how sort of quickly we sort of feel that fear factor that one team's just going to dominate when it's so early? It might turn around. There might be some McLaren dominance that comes through. Ferrari might find a way to get their mini turbo to sort of battle it out with the big turbo. It's still early doors, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I think McLaren, not the previous season, but the season before, where they, Lando started challenging Max for a potential win, didn't quite get there, but the development that happened within that team was phenomenal. It should remind us that anything could change. Please let it change, because I think for F1 fans around the world, we want to see a bloody, brutal fight. We want to see it all the way down to the end. We want to see things. See things shift, which is why I think last year was one of the best seasons in F1 in living memory, because we saw so much shifting. We saw Piastri run away with it. We saw Lando claw it back. Then we saw Chucky, as Max described himself, like the evil cartoon character in the background with the knife. Chucky came back and nearly took it within 2 points. So we want drama. We want these teams to develop their cars. And there are some interesting things happening. Like, I can't believe how well Audi are doing. I can't believe how well Alpine are doing, but particularly Audi, because this is a team that have developed their engine just like Red Bull for the first time on their own, and Bortoletto qualified 9th and Hulkenberg 13th. Like, Sauber were at the bottom of everything for most of the year last year, and here they are. Not even Max Verstappen is qualified in the top 10. I mean, that was brutal, seeing Linblad knock Max out in the RB. I mean, and Hadjar seems to have a better handle on this Red Bull potentially than Max. How is that? Like, what's your thoughts on Hadjar qualifying higher than Max?
Oh, it's a story, isn't it? Both of them, and for Linblad to knock Max out in Q2.
Brutal. In an RB.
I mean, in an RB. But this has been part of the story, I think, of the last maybe second half of last season that the RB is a decent package, and they've
Yeah,
come out the
always has
gates
been, I think.
this season. You know, they're nothing to sniff at. And for the rookie, Linblad is a rookie. Let's not forget. You know, Hadjar's had a full season of racing, and Lindblad's this is his third race weekend altogether. For him to be able to do that is super impressive, and I think a sign of things to come. But also, Max just doesn't like this car.
He doesn't like it.
This regulation set, how Red Bull have interpreted the regulations and how they've built a car. He was talking in the post quali interview about it being sort of too understeery, and we know that he likes the front of the car to be oversteering for the back end to step out. He really likes it when the back end goes out for groceries.
Yeah,
you know, he's just not in a happy place, and it's showing. I'm confident that he'll find a way, and Red Bull will find a way to make the package come closer to his needs. But what a story for our no longer reigning world champion, but he's still a 4-time world champion, to have fallen so far, to be out-qualified by his teammate and out-qualified by his sister team rookie driver. That's got to sting, right?
Jace, I'm haunted by something that you said last year when we were doing the podcast, when Christian Horner was ousted as team principal for many, many reasons, which we shall not go into. And we don't really know, but we could take a stab. And Lauren Meckes came in as the team principal. I think you had this kind of theory that this was the beginning of the undoing of Red Bull. And then, of course, we had last year where actually Max got within 2 points of winning his 5th world championship. But now, I was sitting there the other night, I'm just like, I wonder if Jace was right. I wonder if this is kind of the comet tail effect, right? Where you get a comet going through space, and actually what causes the most disturbance is the tail end of the comet, not the front end of the comet. That's where all the disruption happens, which means it's a time-based kind of deconstruction. Do you think, looking back on your comments last year, even though they had a competitive year last year, are we beginning to see some kind of breakup in atmosphere? Like, was what happened to them last year, did that actually affect the team in ways that we don't understand? That means, actually, although they've developed their own power unit, which is fairly stable, the chassis is not great, the car's not driving great. Like, is there something bigger to this picture than they've just messed up the car a bit? Is this a team that just went through too much destabilization and doubt and fear and anxiety? Is this what we're looking at?
This could be. Wow. Thank you for giving me that predictive credit from last year. I had forgotten that thought. I wonder, so it might be that that's the case, that this is the beginning of the end for Red Bull, and the second half of last year was just sort of hiding that truth. It was there, but we just couldn't see it. It was sort of, what do they call it? Like a watermelon project where it outside looks green and on the inside it's red. But I wonder, maybe also, is it actually just about a new chapter for Red Bull? And they have been for so long built around this sort of pointy edge of the spear, which is Max Verstappen, and just optimizing perfectly for him. And they've failed to do it this year. They may not be able to pull it back. Max may not stick around if he thinks, I'm just going to be battling it out to try and get out of Q2 throughout the whole season. That's not what I'm here for. I'm a pure bed racer. I need to be battling it out for wins. He won in a GT class race over the weekend between the China Grand Prix and the Japanese Grand Prix. So he might just say, I'm done. And that would be another sort of indication of the new chapter for Red Bull, where they've, with new leadership and a new set of drivers coming through, they would have to reconcile themselves with the inability to build a team around a single driver. And they would have to have a kind of a stable, both in terms of stability, but like a collection of drivers that they're all trying to bring through and nurture. So it might not be the very end of Red Bull, but it might be a clear indication that Red Bull is changing in a very fundamental way. And does that put them, given their history, is that success oriented? Because they're really not historically geared that way. It would be like a fundamental rethinking of the organization's philosophy, how they go racing, how they prep, all of that. And can they actually adapt to that? Is adaptation going to be their undoing.
I mean, I'll take one thing out of what you said and think that this is what I felt, is that very pointy front end that Max loves, that we've talked about, like the cursor on the screen, on your computer, the sensitivity he likes to drive with, which meant that many of his teammates couldn't drive this car designed around his incredibly twitchy front end style. Is it possible, it seems increasingly likely so, that this new set of regulations doesn't allow for the development of a car that actually works in a very niche driving style? So the ground force effect cars suited Max beautifully because he had all that downforce and could ride it on a knife edge where no one could. Whereas these cars, I just don't think can give him that pure Max driving style. So I think that's probably what they're grappling with. So I think if Red Bull have got anything to work out, it's like, how can we kind of facilitate Max's driving style in a way that suits this new set of regulations, where the cars are these cars are so fun to watch. They are really, like, all jokes aside on back ends stepping out. The back ends are stepping out all over the place. They're struggling for grip. There's less downforce. It's so fun to watch. But yeah, Max seemingly without that downforce is really struggling.
And if you think, okay, they need to change their car philosophy and not design around a pointy front end and a singular generational talent, does that just make Red Bull a midfield team? You know, is their ceiling lower because they're capped in this way? Speaking of midfield teams, there's a few things I noticed in the qualifying that I thought I'd just point out.
Yeah.
Williams, they seem to have stabilized a bit at the back. They're like, there's not a big gap between Sainz and Albon anymore. They're separated by hundredths of a second, but they're still at the back. So sad for them. They've got a bit more work to do. Alpine, Gasly seems to be thriving. He's right up there in the mix. He qualified P7. Colapinto,
so good,
a second slower. So Colapinto's got some serious work to do. Other midfield surprise would be Ollie Bearman.
Yeah, dropping out.
Dropped out in Q1, and he was something like...
we know why that
7
was.
or 8. No.
Was there anything technical behind that? Because he's been on a great run so far this year.
I couldn't say. I'd be guessing. Okay. But it's a rarity for Ocon to outqualify Bearman. So that one was notable. And then we've got our good old buddies of Cadillac and Aston Martin making up the rear. You know, you mentioned Mr. Honda earlier. I'm sure Mr. Honda and co aren't very happy about the results of the Honda-powered Aston Martin car at the moment. Way off the pace. In Q1, they were 1 minute 32 compared to 1 minute 30 from Kimmy Antonelli. So it's 2 seconds per lap slower around this sort of circuit that's designed by Mr. Honda, and it's practically right next to the Honda factory, etc. That's got to be painful, don't you think?
Very painful. Yeah, it's tough. I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel for this, but you know, I mean, there's also a lot of drama in the press this week, wasn't there, about Adrian Newey and kind of all sorts of movements over at Audi. So do
we have any resolution for that? Is Wheatley moving on?
Wheatley, we don't know where Wheatley's going. He said for personal reasons he's stepping down, but we don't know where he's going, if anywhere. But yeah, I mean, the other two drivers that I'm really interested in is Albon and Sainz, especially when you get a new driver come in, like Sainz has come into the team. Albon's kind of the OG, has been there for the Williams journey. Sainz seems to be continuing his dominant streak. And then also Liam Lawson and Linblad. Like, again, Lawson's been there for a bit on and off, and Linblad's come in, seems to be really dominating. It does feel like it might be a season where the newer team members, Hadjar and Max, like there's a bit of a narrative flowing here with some of these
Kimmy and George.
Kimmy and George, exactly right. Some of these, unfortunately, not Hamilton and Leclerc. We're not quite there yet.
So the pattern is newer team members and younger team members. If it's a newer team member who's older, then it's not working out.
Maybe.
Although, is Sainz older than Albon? That might break the theory. We'll work on that some more.
We'll work on that one, but yeah, probably similar ranges. But so many fun little kind of moments to watch down the kind of the mid and lower end of the field play out this year. Some feathers to be ruffled, I would say, Jason.
Yep.
Who can adapt quicker? Who can adapt to these cars quicker?
Well, you got to imagine it's the younger drivers, right? They're the ones that have been playing the video games all along, and the complexity that they have to contend with. I was trying to actually get my head around the super clipping thing. It's still quite vague, and I don't really fully understand it. But from what I've read, it does seem like it's a switch that you can engage as a driver, so you can be in like regular harvesting mode, or you can be in super clipping mode, and they have that ability to switch between them. And Leclerc really doesn't like it. He seems quite angry about how the whole formula is structured at the moment, and he really wants to, as you say, be the qualifying king and to drive as fast as is humanly possible. I don't know if that's just for his own sort of edification. Is he just a speed demon? Someone needs to actually have a conversation with him about healthy obsessions. But he's really frustrated by the state of play as it is right now. And I wonder, I'd love your thoughts on this, Gab. Do you think he would be more frustrated by the rule makers or by Ferrari's interpretation of the rules and what package they've given him? Where do you think it would lie more, his anger at the moment?
I think it would be more towards the rule makers. I think it would be more towards just the way that this car works in that fashion. Because everyone's grappling with it, but I think, I can't remember if it was Leclerc who said it, but it's this idea that classical racing is who dares wins, who can brake latest, who's got the courage, who can send it into that corner. You see the 100-meter board come up and you're going to go over it by 3 or 4 meters and brake super late. You've got full confidence in the car, full confidence in yourself. That seems to have gone from F1, and we can't ignore that. Like, we're now just at the end of the straight, we're beginning to brake and harvest and super clip, and it is just a different kind of racing. Now, at the beginning of this season, I was a bit like, I was with the drivers because so many of them said this. But then, you've kind of said things like, Jace, look, you're the top 22 people in the world. You get to do this for a living. You get paid millions. I think Lando echoed this. Look, you're in such a position of privilege. Just learn how to drive the new cars. And I think as I've seen more wheel-to-wheel racing, this racing on a knife edge, I'm like, okay, we are losing that element of the sport currently. We're losing that who dares wins, who can brake latest into a corner, which people like Leclerc are clearly lamenting. And yet we're kind of gaining in other areas. So, tough. But I would say it's the actual set of regulations that Leclerc and the way these cars have to be designed would have a problem with.
We'll have to have a think about what we'd change. Maybe that's a good Gap podcast concept to talk about, what we'd change and whether we'd introduce actual turtle shells into the racing mix or if we'd just stick with banana peels.
I love it. Well, look, let's wrap up here. So excited for Suzuka. The Honda design course, probably one of the most beautiful to look at, with the cherry blossoms, with the S-curves, with Spoon, with just that incline. There's incredible inclines. So excited to watch this. What are your final predictions? Can Kimmy, who cares? Let's forget about every other battle just for this final statement. Can Kimmy hold on to that P1 and dominate his older brother, Uncle, let's call him Uncle George, who's been so comfortable putting his arm around Kimmy, being like, you'll get there, buddy. What happens? Can he dominate Uncle George?
Yes. Yes, he can.
Yes, he can.
But I think George is fighting with one arm behind his back because, as Toto mentioned, they'd made some twerks to the car, so the rear end kept stepping out on the beat. So I think George will actually have a tough time this race, and he may even struggle to keep Leclerc behind. And if he does, then kudos to him because I think his car's got some challenging characteristics, let's say. So I reckon Kimmy will be able to do it. And I'm reminded that Kimmy's first laps ever leading a Grand Prix happened at the Japanese Grand Prix last year. He was leading the race for about 12 laps or so before he needed to pit. He was never going to win the race, but that was a sort of a first taste of what we've got in store. Yes, I believe Kimmy can do it. Do you agree, Gav?
I agree. And as long as I get a little Ferrari sandwich in between those two Mercedes, that will be like the cherry on the cake for me. If I get a nice little Leclerc, bit of ham in the middle of those two slices of white bread, if I get a toasty that looks like that, and Ferrari don't mess up the strategy, I'll be so happy.
You missed such an obvious opportunity, Gav. You could have chucked ham in the middle of the Mercedes, and it could have been a literal ham sandwich.
What did I say?
You said Leclerc. What about Hamilton?
Oh, okay, yeah. Double pastrami and chorizo. Yeah, that's Spanish. Can't say that. But, okay, mate. Well, look, see you on track in 2 hours. Can't wait. And
Bring it on.
Fresh Rubber will be back momentarily to discuss the race that is about to unfold. See you there.